Survivor specialists John and McKenna are back, except McKenna's not here this week. Don't worry, she's still here. She's still doing the Survivor Rewind. She's just away this week. But because of that, I am joined by friend of the podcast from the Reality After Show, Alex Trias. Alex, how are you doing today?
Phil said Johnny won too many times last night. You couldn't get Johnny. He's a little busy with House of Villain stuff, but you got me instead. I hope y'all will enjoy my antics here.
Well, I know I'm super happy to have you, and I'm sure our listeners are too. Before we dive into this episode and the rewind, looking at what this episode reminds us of in Survivor's past, how are you feeling about 43 so far? Or 45 so far?
Well, 43 is a different story. But 43 I liked. 45 I'm loving. So 45, especially with 90 minutes, you'll hear it from what I talked about these last few episodes. Like, you're really getting to see these tribes fleshed out more. So it gives you a lot of the older, like, golden age of Survivor vibes, where you truly understand the context. You understand where people's motives are and why they are the way they are. And providing good entertainment. Things that bothered us in the first 4 seasons, too much focus on advantages, some of the old stuff that we cherished was taken away, we're seeing come back. And while the advantages still have their shine, with 90-minute episodes, you're able to get so much more camp life and strategy talk, which was very much needed. So I'm loving it.
Actually, I feel the same way. I feel like for somehow these episodes just keep getting better, and I feel like this episode last night is just more of that. It's dealing with, yes, it has this camp life, it has these moments. We're not seeing a lot of like the Bellow tribe because there wasn't a lot going on there last night, but we got so much more of the Reba tribe last night.
Yes.
We found out a lot about their tribe dynamics because we're taking the time and dedicating it to these players. And even though we're not seeing a lot of J Maya, we're not seeing a lot of Sifu, which is unfortunate. There was a secret scene of J Maya that came out today with her like sharing her religion with the tribe and stuff, and it was really cool. But we don't get to see that because there's so much else going on in that Reba tribe. It just feels like we finally get to know these players as we're watching them.
Absolutely. And in regards to J Maya and Sifu, do not discredit, because as this is a Survivor Rewind, while it may not have been on the episode, they had their dragons moment.
They did. Yeah, we did have Sifu and J Maya coming together to make some very awkward music if you looked at Jay's face. But Sifu was just rocking out.
Loved it. Loved every bit of it. Had to just throw that in there. Shout out to the dragons. If you know, you know.
Yes, the infamous dragons. I mean, it's one of those great Survivor hidden moments that hopefully everyone knows about. But let's dive into this episode. So we kind of started this episode with Lulu Tribe coming back from Tribal Council. They're talking, through the vote and like, oh, man, that was tough. And then Emily straight up says, hey, there was a vote missing. And she asked Sean, did you not vote? No, Sabaya, did you not vote? It's something that's more common in this new phase of Survivor, because we're just kind of getting to that point now where not having a vote is starting to become common. We don't see it a lot. We kind of saw it. We see it in Heroes, Healers, Hustlers, where similar to this episode, there's an advantage that requires you to sacrifice a vote in order to claim it. But for the most part, this is a very new thing. Alex, are we going to see people counting votes more often when it comes to tribal councils now?
I think it's a lot more obvious also in a smaller tribe. Like when Lauren did it, if my memory is right, it was after merge, so still a big group where it's a lot easier to hide yourself not voting if there's a clear majority. Whereas when you're only 5 people, 4 people, and every vote counts and only 2 votes are read, the math doesn't math, and it's going to get called out.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I appreciate that we finally get that talk about votes, because we kind of get them once in a while. We have those like historic moments of, Lex flipping out because his name's brought up in Africa. The Rupert who voted for me in Pearl Islands. But we don't get a lot of like the number dissection of votes. And it was nice seeing that type of conversation, that type of analysis of votes as they're being read. And like afterwards trying to evaluate, okay, what does this mean? Especially in the new era where people not having votes means they have an advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see later on a advantage that sort of helps counteract that with the goodwill advantage. And I'm sure you'll have your thoughts on it when we get to that spot. But I like that that's being included in there as a way to like sort of be a countering agent for something that could really blow up your spot in the game, especially when tribes are so small.
Yeah. I mean, let's just talk about the goodwill advantage now, because it's a new thing in Survivor, right? It's not something we can really relate to things in the past. Phil mentioned last night that like this is a type of like such a minusculely impactful advantage that it's a really nice thing to introduce. It's this nice new tool that we get introduced to the arsenal of survival advantages or survivor advantages, but it's not something that's warping the game to an extent. And it's a little awkward that it only benefits someone else who's already found another advantage or is in the process of finding another advantage. But at the same time, it's so useless to so many people. It's not changing the way people vote.
No, it's not changing how people vote, but I think it's put in there to help incentivize people to take more of a risk. Because now you have this insurance policy, as Drew calls it, where if they didn't have that beware advantage, maybe they're looking for that advantage more often now that they have this in their back pocket of like, okay, well, there is no risk anymore of me losing my vote. I can still use a vote. So I'm going to actively search for an idol. There's no repercussions now.
And even like looking just back to last week's episode where Brandon loses his vote on the journey because he doesn't complete the challenge, right? Being able to take that risk is so huge. It gives people more incentive to attempt these type of risky maneuvers that we see Bruce decide not to, right? Because he's like, you know what? I'm not great at puzzles. I'm not going to risk my vote. And then you see Brandon being like, I can do this, loses his vote. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. He's probably getting voted out anyways. But it's huge, right? And like it changes the math, because when you're at a point in tribal council where there's 4 or 5 people left, every vote matters so much more than it would in these seasons with larger initial tribes. So when we get to a point where people are losing their votes, there were 3 votes cast last night. This type of advantage makes it so that you can kind of still have larger numbers despite people losing their votes because of the style that productions decided to go with some of these newer advantages.
Yep, absolutely. I have no other points to add to that. That summarizes it greatly.
So we get into the episode proper here, and we get a scary moment to start us off. We have Jake. He's tending the fire. He's blowing on it, and he breathes in, I guess, too much smoke. Keeping in mind that like these are people who are they're starving, they're hungry, they're malnourished, they're in the hot Fijian sun the entire time. You inhale that smoke and he goes down, and it's a scary moment. Obviously, we have a big moment like this in Survivor history when Scoopin falls in the fire in Australian Outback. This is something that was kind of telegraphed in the preview. Alex, how did you feel about this? Seeing this happen, like, is this a worrying moment, or is it just one of those like, oh, this happened? This was just a moment to kind of segue into the future Kendra Jake conversation.
Like, I guess, like, in terms of the episode itself, I don't mind it being used as the gateway to it, especially because now that we know he's fine. It left a bad taste in my mouth that it was used in the preview. Especially because you have a precedent in the past of something happening. Is it rare? Yeah. Yes. But like when you're suddenly trying to hint at people that, or your audience of like, oh, Jake might fall into the fire. when you had someone fall into the fire.
Yeah.
It made me feel a little uneasy. But in terms of the episode itself, yeah, it's like it showed that Kendra cares. She's someone who is actively going to try to help, and then it also helps them bond to have this conversation that they apparently haven't had for the first 6 days they've been there.
Yeah, what a wild conversation that ended up being. The thing with this fire thing is I don't know how many newer Survivor fans know about the Scoop and Fire incident and how like game changing that moment was. Right? Mm-hmm. It's a terrifying moment, obviously. We don't see it like we do here, right? Like we don't have a camera like directly on Scoopin like we do Jake, where we like see him fall over and everything. Thankfully, because oh my god, could you imagine actually seeing someone fall on fire? But that incident completely changed the course of that season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's without saying, Scoopin was a major part of Australian Outback, where he would have been a big target for the other tribe going into that merge. Potentially another controversial person. Varner maybe isn't the target immediately out the gate. That tribe may take full control. Like we see a different winner. We see different people going to All-Stars potentially. Like it's a big event that has many ramifications.
Yeah, it's one of those pivotal moments in Survivor that just made it so that we had the history of Survivor that we have now. But you know, let's get out of the doom and gloom of it. Let's head over to Reba, and we see Austin and Drew. They're doing this like buddy system search for the idol, where they're like one's on guard and one's digging, and apparently it's a very terrible buddy system because Dee and Julie just walk right up on Drew. And there are some pretty. There are a few moments where this kind of reminds me of like with those idol hunts where someone comes up and just like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like Ty, as he's like climbing a tree to get a idol in Korong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very tricky situations that we've seen many people that were beloved by the fandom go through. Like you said with Ty, it was like I remember watching it. Well, not live because my first season was 33. But I went back. That was the first season I watched it. And like you get an instant connection with Ty and you sort of feel like he's on the outs. And so you're like, oh, yes, he's finding idol. Then everyone's just like, yeah, but we see him actively searching for the idol. So you get nervous.
Yeah, and in other instances, we have where it's so detrimental because in Guatemala, the first season with an immunity idol, you have Judd's won a clue to the whereabouts of the idol, and he knows not to look on the ground, and he tells everyone on the tribe, oh yeah, the clue says it's on the ground for sure. And then Gary just catches him looking up and like looking in trees, and it's enough for Gary Hogaboom to end up being the person to actually find this idol.
Yeah.
And I had questions about how these beware advantages worked, whereas if Austin wasn't the person to find the actual idol, and obviously there's enough different steps to these idols where you kind of mitigate the chances of someone else finding it. But if Austin wasn't the one to find it, like, does he not have a vote until merge or the rest of the game? Like, how is that outlined? And when we get further along in this episode and Dee and Julie, find the rope, which leads to the hammer, which they then give right to Austin and Drew. Like, if they had kept that hammer to themselves, does Drew just lose his vote completely?
It's possible. Like, we don't know what the fine print is because these idols, while you said yes, have steps to it, yes, are a little more difficult to find potentially. It's like, use Lulu's idol, for example. It just so happened to be connected to a rope with hidden in a coconut on a tree with no coconut. So if I was just walking around and I'd find that, is Soraya just out of luck because I found the candle?
Yeah.
I don't even know that it's an idol at that point. I just know it's a candle.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the Guatemala example, right? Like, The idol in Guatemala was so different because it was essentially just an immunity necklace, right? It was a one-time immunity necklace where it's like you play it before the votes, they can't vote for you. So it would, and that they were very much intending to send Gary home with that vote. It was a huge blunder for Judd to be caught looking for that idol.
Yep.
And then another instance, which is like less ramifications and stuff, but like people just dealing with people coming up on them as they're looking for an idol. We have China, right? When Frosty's like climbing on the archway as Todd's trying to like pry off the idol. And it's just one of those things where it's obviously with China, it's a lot harder because the idol was in such a plain spot, very obvious for people to see, which is, I guess it does kind of relate to this idol that we see on the Reba Beach, because from everything that they're saying, it was really close to where the tribe was, or to where camp was, right?
Yeah, they were saying the branches were pretty close to camp. Like you have Dee and Julie when they find them digging, pretty much with his pants at his ankles. It's like they were debating, are we at camp again? Like that they're close enough to camp where it's known where they're located. So it sort of is what it is. I don't know. I got a big kick of seeing Drew looking like a deer in headlights because unlike Phil, unlike everyone else, I've said it on Reality App Show, it's part of my bit. Drew is someone that I'm rooting actively against in this game. How he's moving versus how his archetype is supposed to be does not match. Bravo to him, but I'm rooting against him.
I haven't got an opinion quite on Drew yet. I'm waiting to see where things go with him before I fully form the opinion, but it was a bad look today. Especially the worst look was when Dee and Julie came up and he like explains that they saw seafood digging there, and then he immediately goes to tell Austin as he rolls up his lie. It's just such a red flag, right? It's like, okay, we're making sure they're getting on the same track with lying, and like I was really worried for him. He seemed to pull it off later in the episode with the sharing of knowledge, which is actually what we're about to get to. And just that idea of like, okay, we do need to rope them in so that we can actually find this. But man, I felt very, like Clutch Patrick said here, I was kind of scared for Drew in this episode because it seemed like he was just a blundering mess.
Oh, I wasn't scared. I was grinning ear to ear. I was loving seeing him exposed. I love seeing that he's a terrible liar. Dee calling him out. Dee looking fantastic in these confessionals with her reads. But it goes to an overall thing that we won't really touch on in this type of episode or recap. But every season has its script of like what it values, and this season definitely values above all else like genuine honesty. I talked about it in my recap last night. These people, where I thought it would fail, how honest these people are being to each other is actually bonding them closer in this specific cast.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, let's talk about that honesty here, because we have this idea of like sharing clues, right? We saw it last week with the Lulu tribe and with Sabaya sharing with Caleb and Sean. And we see it again here. We have like, Austin and Drew are already connected. They still can't find this idol, so they share the clue with Dee and Julie, who they're really pounding home this group of four. We've seen this before, right? Like we've seen sharing of idol clues. We saw it in Fiji with Yaoman and Earl. We've seen it in Philippines, right? When Abby Maria can't find this idol with her idol clue saying that it's right under her nose. She fills in Pete, and like they work together to find the idol. Island of the Idols, when Tommy finds a clue that literally he is physically unable to do because he's colorblind, he has to share it with what's his name? No, it's not Lord. It's Dean. Yes, Dean. Right, and it's like we've seen it in the past where it's a little more like desperate when sharing these idol clues, right? And it's just becoming so much more common now.
Yeah, Absolutely. It's interesting with the advantages because it's just like, is it really an advantage anymore? I know Phil talks about that too. Like when everyone knows, like you're working
Yeah.
together with it. So how advantageous are these advantages? Because these advantages are supposed to, for the most part, help you as an individual player, but you're being incentivized now to be helping more than just yourself. And we'll see at the end of the episode, like that type of decision, while part of it could be looked at as being greedy, part of it was like, well, I'm saving this for the people that I'm rocking with in the future that we can use to protect
Yeah.
each other. And you go home because of it.
No, exactly. Like, it's such an interesting point where we're at with advantages because it seems like we've gotten to the point where people are playing. It's like the triple negative essentially when it
Yep.
comes to advantages, and it's just really fascinating watching this evolution of how they're treated with, because we're still at a point where we're telling people, hey, don't tell people about your advantages. But in this very specific instance with Reba, it seems to be the right play to just let the people know about it.
Or at least to let the people specifically that you want to like really build that trust with. Like I'm against Drew telling everybody under the sun that he has the
Yeah.
safety without power. Like,
Yeah.
did he need to tell Caleb that he had that? No. There was no reason that he had to divulge every single little thing that happened there. Like, come on now. But telling your allies of like your idol clues and stuff like that, because you see, especially if you understand their motivations. It was clear after being caught, he has to realize Julie and Dee really value honesty. They really value sharing information with each other. Austin and I shouldn't have held this away from them if they are people that we value for a deep run in this game. So we're going to share it.
Yeah, and we see the inverse of that later in this episode when Sabaya tells Emily about her idol.
Yep.
And it backfires. And Emily's like, I now don't trust her because she clearly is only telling me out of hopes that I vote with her.
Yeah, and it's funny because so many times, like there's too many to really reference, but there's so many times where the sharing of an idol, no matter if they had just found it or have been holding it for a while, does build that trust, even if like you know that they were withholding this information from you. That person ends up either joining them and becoming part of their alliance, or joins them in that vote because they see that they're on the bottom, and now this is like their way of saving themselves. This is the life raft. Whereas Emily now goes in that opposite direction, which I loved. And it was like, no, she's obviously using me. Caleb has valued me. She's just using me for a vote so then she can kick me out when it's just the three of us. So you can go kick rocks.
Yeah.
Or yell at them like Gandia.
It's I mean, the Lulu tribe is just so fascinating. I love watching that tribe, and it's a shame that we finally get a tribe swap in the new era next week.
Oh, what a shame that we get.
It's such a shame that we don't get to keep the same tribe dynamics anymore. But like we'll talk tribe swap next week. Don't worry. Let's get into this reward challenge. It's one that we've seen a few times. It's a newer challenge where they're throwing up the ball into the track, and then they have to run through the obstacles and catch it in time. We saw it in Edge of Extinction. Winners at War, obviously, we saw it towards the end of the game where Michelle was really struggling with it. That was the one where Nick wins individual immunity. Yep. And then, again, we saw it most recently in 41 where Heather couldn't do it.
Oh, remember Heather was someone on the season?
Yes, I do.
I do.
That's fair. And then it goes into this kind of new iteration of ring toss where they have to sink a ball into a hoop to raise a stand to throw rings on. And it's really interesting because in the past, we've seen many different iterations of ring toss. This is one where it didn't matter which rung you got the ring on, which kind of felt like a little cheap to me because it didn't seem that hard. It didn't seem like this was that far away from where people were throwing these rings.
Right. Like if you're able to grandma toss these, which is the right move to do here with a straightforward hit, make them hit all three rungs. It's not that hard. Yeah. Caleb could have done it. It's okay.
Yeah. Alex, do you have a favorite iteration of ring toss that we've seen so far on Survivor?
Oh, of course, it's the oars.
Okay.
It's the tilting oars where you have to get the rung on in order to raise the oar.
Mhm.
I think I remembered a lot. I think the last time they did it was maybe Game Changers. It may have had another season after that it popped up in, but that's my favorite iteration of it.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting. Again, it plays on that. You're not just hitting the same target over and over again. You have to like diversify your targets.
Yeah,
And it has that cool. I think it has a good visual effect. I think is the best part about that one.
that's the thing because I know McKenna loves her challenges.
Yeah.
I'm the type of person that like I'll watch them. There's some that I'll be very invested in, but most of the ones I'm invested in, you have the good camera work. Like you have the good
Mhm.
visual shots. It moves in a way that's a little more exciting than just I'm gonna grandma toss this ring.
Yeah.
I can just go outside, set up a ring toss, and I can watch myself do that.
Yeah, that's very true. Especially in a season where they seem to be moving away from things you can do at home. Uh, so with this reward, we get a very new school type of reward with this big fruit platter. This fruit platter came out, and I was like, nice. Jeff just grabbed stuff they could have found on their beach. And then the smaller fruit platter for second place. But most importantly, there is a tribe raid attached to winning this challenge.
Mm.
Alex, we have a long history of raids in Survivor. The first one, of course, being in Marquesas, where the entire tribe got to go, and they had 2 minutes. They could take anything that weren't like personal items or like the bare necessity items to keep people alive. What's your favorite raid in Survivor history?
Oh, it's any from Pearl Islands when I get to see good old Johnny Fairplay's tribe keep diminishing and demoralizing Andrew Savage and his band of misfits. I love Sandra more like the most. Sandra going in and tearing down their shelter
Yeah.
because they refused to help because she wanted the tarp. I love Johnny's stories. He talks about it all the time, where he has
Mhm.
told it time and time again. He wanted each person who had gone to raid to take the pot so that they could not boil water, and
Yes, because
then you just win by default.
that was in the time where you actually had to boil water on Survivor, and the wells weren't stocked with drinking water, as we've seen on recent seasons. Because some tribes don't get their flint for 9 days.
It's almost like fire doesn't represent life anymore.
Yeah, yeah. We have a couple other tribe raids that have happened afterwards. Token Chains, you had JT and Joe go over, grab some stuff. I think Cagayan's pretty relevant to this episode. That's where Tony and Wu go, and they're schmoozing, trying to figure out some stuff. But more importantly, like they get a clue to the hidden immunity idol. It's clearly a clue to the idol on their beach, and they like pull Jeremiah aside, kind of how like what Caleb does here, where he pulls every individual aside, but they make this big show of pulling Jeremiah aside, giving him this idol clue, and trying to sow distrust in his own tribe. Where in contrast, we have Caleb trying to build trust with this opposing tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great comparison. Very apt to see, because it is different and the same at the same time. Of like trying to sabotage a player there versus trying to build a cross tribal line for the eventual earn the merge phase. Because at this point, Caleb can't rely on potentially finally having a swap. They didn't even get this. I don't think they even got to see all the way through 44. So I don't know how deep into the season they got to where they had the one person from each tribe rotate. So there's no benefit there. It's more like, can I pick the right person who will then tell the rest of the tribe, so that now potentially whoever survives of my Lulu tribe, maybe we have 5 to 6 new allies that we can count on when everything comes together.
Yeah, exactly. It's clever in this era of Survivor. It's so important to capitalize on these moments where you have to speak to other tribes, especially because we don't have tribe swaps. Uh, and Caleb just does it so well. And this is something that previous raids we haven't. We kind of see it with Cody in 43, where they send this very personable guy, someone who can schmooze them really well. But Cody kind of comes off the wrong way in that raid, whereas Caleb comes off with a huge threat. Like, they're all talking how Caleb is just so dangerous after this. And we know, because we have so much preseason press this season, that people were already feeling that way about Caleb going into the game. And this is kind of just confirming everything for them. But Caleb's just taking advantage of this moment he gets. And the rest of the Lulu tribe was totally fine with him doing it.
But were they fine with him doing it for the exact same reason? Because we see the very next scene is we go back to the Lulu tribe while they're waiting for Caleb to return, and Sabaya's already thinking about the end of the game. She's thinking about, well, we've all already had this notion that Caleb's so likable. He's great at the challenges. He's that type of body type that's going to be good at the individual challenges. How are we going to get rid of him when we can take the shot now with people that we can actually rely on because we have gone through votes together, so to speak?
Yeah, it's so interesting. It was a big point of conversation on the predictions and power rankings this last week with Lindsay that Phil and Alexa did, where they're talking about, like, when you're in these small tribes, you're getting closer to a merge. That's when you can start sacrificing these power players who you've been relying on to strengthen, like, to kind of beast you through these challenges. And I think this is something we've seen so many times in Survivor, where we have these decimated tribes and they have to start thinking about, okay, we have to make the decision, like, are we taking out the big threat? Are we taking out someone who is weaker, who, like, is more loyal to us, but, you know, we might lose another challenge, and then we lose another person, and we're just voting them out anyways. We look at Oolong, right? Oolong, as they couldn't win a individual or an immunity challenge whatsoever, and they get to a point where the last four in that tribe are what? Stephanie, Bobby, John, Ibrahim, and James, and they have to decide between Ibrahim and James, and it's like, Ibrahim seems to be fading a lot faster than James, but he's more loyal. And that's a conversation that we get here, where it's like, do we take out Emily, who's like this easy vote, who, you know, is she going to be loyal to us? She'll probably jump ship come a merge because, you know, she's kind of been on the outs. Or do we get rid of Caleb, who is someone, it's so fascinating in this one, because Caleb is someone who Sabaya is so close with, but she's thinking so far ahead that she's just blinded by this idea, I can't beat Caleb, so I might as well take him out of the game now.
Yeah, it's a weird mindset to have. Like, it's like, I'm someone who's like within the online community of like online reality TV games, and it's something that you see there all the time. I feel like a lot more than what you see on the actual show, where like, oh, I'm going to take this person out because they're going to be the threat at the end. Like, we saw that phase of like the second boot woman for like 10 straight seasons, because everyone was afraid she's the next Parvati, like type of ordeal. Like, I think we saw that all the way up through like season 39. We saw people getting voted out because, oh no, well, if we let her stay past a vote, she becomes Parvati. We get a new Black Widow brigade. We can't have that happening. But it's like obviously gender reversed here. But it's like, it's that overconfidence of like, things are going your way. You're in that power position. And while you're allied with this person, you see the threat that he is because you see him as an equal. And the only way to remove that equal so that you can control everything is by cutting him out, which it makes it her deficit, because she has to rely on a player that she just this last round had to physically take her shot in the dark because she trusted her the least.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing, no trust actually built other than she gave the shot in the dark back.
Yeah. And we've seen this instance with Matt Singh as well. Matt Singh had a similar instance where at Final Four, it's Malcolm, Denise, Angie, and Russell left. And there's conversations at that point about, okay, do we vote out Angie? Do we vote out Russell? Both of them kind of sucked in that challenge. You can hear a lot more about that on the Patreon tomorrow because Alex and I are, in fact, talking about Philippines episode 3 over there. But the thing to really look at here is there's a conversation between Denise and Malcolm where they're like, okay, both these two are like not doing great in challenges. Russell is technically physically stronger, should help us more in challenges. But if we get, this was still in that era of Survivor where like people had this misconception that the very strong built man was the type of person who would dominate these individual challenges. This isn't Big Brother. That's not how individual challenges work in Survivor, but that mentality was still there. And we see them saying, like, they actually have that conversation with, but can we beat Russell in the individual portion of this game? And it's just one of those moments where like people can get so focused too far down in the game sometimes, and it can cost them.
For sure. And especially there, it's like there's a joke to be had there is what you value more, God or cookies. But we can save that for the Patreon. But yeah, it's interesting because also you have a Brandon reference there of him not being of Russell not being able to climb a ladder, and he had more rungs to use than Brandon did, and it was an actual ladder. But yeah, it's like, what do you value more in these because you're forced immediately into these tight votes? It's so imperative that you make these right calls. So I'm glad that we're covering that episode on your Patreon, because I think there's so much that you can learn there, especially if you're someone who wants to play in this new format of Survivor. There's so many, not just strategy, but just the mindset you need to have in order to make the right decisions for you as the type of player that you are versus the type of players that they are.
Yeah, 100%. So let's go back to the Bello tribe for a moment. Yes, they are in this episode, I promise. And we just get our Katurah and Bruce segment again, where Katurah's really not jiving with Bruce. But the interesting thing about this time is we're kind of starting seeing it to bleed out from Katurah, where she's like mentioning it. And like now we kind of have Kelly jumping on board, and we see it like Kelly mentions it at the immunity challenge, how like Bruce is really annoying. And, you know, Kelly's kind of bleeding on into Brando. Let's go back to Philippines. That's kind of exactly what happened with Abby Maria and RC, except Abby did it straight to RC's face at the same time.
Yeah, social.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say. Social.
Yeah. It's just so fascinating because, like, we talked about these, like, one-sided rivalries before last week, but, like, it's evolving here. It's evolving where Katurah's, like, really spreading this word, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out come a swap.
Yeah, because this is all speculation just based off some things I saw. It looks like obviously Jake and Bruce are together. I believe it was shown that Katurah's also with them.
Interesting.
But we haven't seen this, like, I know it's a one-sided rivalry, but we haven't seen Bruce's perspective. We didn't even get a confessional this episode from him. We don't know his feelings towards Katurah. We know it was like guys, girls type of thing. She isn't in the guys plus Kelly alliance. But is it going to be this type of thing where Bruce is willing to work with them because they were on the same tribe together, but does Katurah turn because she's like, now it's my moment. Now it's my moment. I have other people from a different tribe. I can tell them all the annoying shit that he's been doing, and maybe I get my way.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch this unfold. I don't think Bruce is going to be quite as apologetic as RC was in Philippines or like question it as much. I think Bruce will probably accept it more than RC did, but I think he's still going to work to make amends if he ever finds out about it.
Yeah.
Let's get to this advantage, like this idol that we find in this episode, because we already talked about it. Like, Dee and Julie are there. They find the rope. They get the hammer. They get the hammer. First off, these idols on these tribes totally like very disparate in their like difficulties to find. Because because breaking a rock with a hammer they give you and melting a candle, two very different things. One you can do very discreetly. The other is very obvious.
No, yeah, it's something I was thinking about, but like to me, I'm not as like I'm not up in arms about the levels of difficulty. I sort of enjoy the fact that there's different levels of difficulty because we get to see potential nuance in how you go about it. Like either way, both situations require teamwork. I feel like even though this one I think was overall easier, it was because it was closer to camp. It's more difficult.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you have more chances of being caught. So you have this group. You're isolating Jay and Sifu and making sure that they're not looking around. It's a lot of collaboration, a lot of real quick give and go. There was a moment where the hammer came out and I didn't see the head of the hammer.
Yeah.
So I thought we were going to get a reference to it's an effing stick as the idol, which
Right.
To be clear, I would rather stick than the type of idols that they're giving now that are just friendship bracelets, essentially.
That's fair. That is a fair assessment. So this is a brand new idol that we haven't really seen before. It's good for one tribal council. If you give up your vote at that first tribal council you go to, it is then good until the fake merge. And then if you give up a second vote at the next tribal council you go to, it's good until final 5, like a regular idol. We haven't seen this type of advantage before. It's really interesting because like we've seen in Hero Healers Hustlers, Laura Rimmer obviously has the steal vote that she can use if she gives up her vote at the final 11, which she does. But that's kind of the only time we've ever seen votes as currency in the Survivor. So let's just even like take this over to fire tokens for a moment, where we had this introduction of a Survivor currency that didn't really work. Like fire tokens are kind of like one of those big failures of Winners at War. Using the vote as currency, which is something that has an intrinsic value, you know exactly what a vote is worth in Survivor, and being able to leverage that as a currency that people now can exchange for different powers is such a great design space for production to get into. For sure. I like it. I like the risk that's needed for it. But it's like it's an active your choice risk. You can have this shot clock idol and just use it. Just use it. Because like Phil said, I forget if he said it on the actual recap or on behind the paywall on his after show, but it's like that you could use it because you also now have an advantage over the rest of the people because you have an idea of where they will hide these advantages. So you could play the idol, get what you need done, and then you can go out and search again. Because the second time, most likely as soon as it's planted, will be easier for you because now you have a better idea of where they would hide it. But with that, this is very online Survivor. This is very online reality games. Risk your vote to gain more power type of thing. I'm for it. Go nuts. If you're gonna steal from the online community, steal the good stuff. Hey, if they finally have discovered a way to introduce a currency into Survivor without introducing anything else, I think it's a fantastic way to just replace fire tokens because you don't have to add anything to the game and it has enough weight to it that people will actually consider not doing it at sometimes too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think making it so that Zydo's good at one vote and then they have to like give up their vote at that single vote to get it the first step really messes with the way people think about this advantage.
Yeah, and I think timing's also important. Like we don't know what Sabaya would have done if she was able to burn that idol quicker and get that information before she went into the voting booth. Like because we see two very different things that could happen. we got this Reba tribe with this idol. You're in a majority alliance. You can risk it. You can risk it. You know you have the idol. They're not going to be planning multiple tribe idols. So you can get rid of Sifu. You can get rid of J Maya. It doesn't matter. You can bank your phone. Now suddenly you can get to the merge. And even if you don't even have to do that, you just have to skip one time if you never go to tribal. And then you have it till Final 5 for your tribe. So there's opportunities there versus we see tonight Sabaya make that decision in a round where, while yes, you can't fault her for trying to bank it. She didn't calculate Caleb's relationship, whatever. You're still only 4 votes. You're only 4 votes, and anything could have happened. So why wouldn't you just play the idol for yourself? You have an idea of where they're being hidden. Play the idol for yourself. Caleb goes. Like, it is what it is. Like, it's an easy explanation of being like, hey, this said I can only use it tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, if you use the idol there, you're ensuring Caleb goes, but you're also voting for Caleb. So it's like that's also kind of ensuring Caleb goes. It's just fascinating what this does to the game. I think this changes the game completely, and like the way the game's played, it's not in a negative way, which is the big thing.
Yeah. It's not big, it's not game breaking, but it can change the game, and that's okay.
So let's just go through this immunity challenge quickly. It's Dragon the Dragon, where they get the cart, they have to take it with them, grab the big heavy puzzle pieces. Eventually there's a wall, which they have to take their cart apart and put it through with the puzzle pieces. And then they have to build this puzzle. A puzzle that seems simple is really out in the world. We don't see a lot in Survivor, though, which I loved. This like cube puzzle. And it was a large one, too. I think it was 12 pieces is what I counted. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was less or more. But I figured that's what it's about. The first part of this challenge we've seen a few times. We saw it first in Cagayan. It was the first challenge in that season. We saw it in Cambodia. The difference in Cambodia was that the puzzle people could swap out. Because this was usually the dragon puzzle, right? Like the twin dragon puzzle.
Yep.
We saw it at Winners in War. We saw it in 42. It was like the first challenge in 42, but they kind of changed it. And it was like in the water instead. And then we have it here in 45, where instead of like having like your dedicated puzzle people, you have a caller. It's an interesting evolution of this challenge. I think this challenge is kind of neat. Is there a necessity in them taking the card apart though?
There is none. Johnny and I talked about it with our other co-hosts last night. Like, there really is no reason for like the break it apart just for the sake of breaking it apart. I guess you could argue like this is a chance for like the strong people to help gain your tribe an advantage by like being able to break it apart quicker and whatnot. Like, we see Bello get a head start because they were able to maneuver it more efficiently because they had more bigger body people with Bruce and Jake. I think that's all it is. I would have wanted like more of like maybe like an Australian Survivor approach. Like, I feel like there's ones where they've had the bridge, but like you have to open the gate. You have to have someone physically opening it so everyone can get through. I don't know. It's superfluous.
Yeah, it is. I agree. So, we get there. Lulu loses again. As soon as Lulu won this reward, I knew they were going to lose this immunity challenge. I was like, they got the win on the challenge they didn't need to win. I felt it coming. But
like this also harkens to Philippines.
It does.
With the music.
Yeah.
Oh.
That sad music as they lose again.
You're just fixating on Emily the way that it fixated on Russell Swan.
Yeah.
As like, you're losing. Oh crap. Is this the end of my game? Is this the end of my story? And I don't know where I was talking about it, but I was like, it's so more fun having that, like the sad music of the tribe that keeps going to tribal again, instead of what's usually the case of this exciting ramp up, adrenaline pumping music because we're about to get a winner and the excitement of seeing someone win. I liked the change of like, no, the story we're telling isn't about the people winning. It's about the people losing.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And it's wonderful. I love this take on Survivor storytelling because, like you said, it is so subversive to what we expect. We usually expect that amp up. Even with like a lot of the times in challenges, we can tell when a challenge is about to end based on the music. And in this episode, that music's just so haunting and it feels so diminishing because like we really feel the weight of this loss for the Lulu tribe.
Yeah, because like we're like at first we're just like, okay, they're the weak tribe. That's our impression of them. Like they're the weak people. They're gonna get Matt singed. They're gonna be Uwad. You know, like they're gonna get down to 2. But then, like last episode, you get a little bit more excitement, and you have Emily realizing people aren't stocks, and they're actually human beings with blood pumping through them. And then this episode, you're like, all you want, it's you watching your kid who isn't good at sports have a chance to like kick the soccer ball, try to score a goal, and he just falls.
Yeah,
and you're just like, God, you had it, you had it.
But it did leave us to a pretty great tribal council. Like the tribal council itself wasn't that exciting, other than the fact that we have this brand new thing happening where Sabaya has thrown something in the fire and is continuously tending it. I don't think Jeff liked this that much.
I keep going back and forth with it because tribal is Jeff's time. As much as it's the player's time, it's Jeff's time. And he didn't get to call anybody a water boy, just like he was back in the day. But we have seen things thrown into the fire. We once again, Triple H, we see Dr. Mike after Lauren gives him, I think it was like half of the idol.
Half of the immunity idol, yeah.
And he's like, okay, yeet, throws it into the fire. I don't want it. I don't want you to have it. You're going home. Like we've seen buffs thrown into the fire. We've seen fake idols thrown into the fire after Jeff like calls people out like, no, this isn't real. Thanks for wasting my time. Throws it in the fire. We got another thing thrown in the fire, but at least this is the first time something was thrown in the fire that was taken out. And we always ask about like if someone throws something into the fire, if they had just brought 2 sticks, like Sabaya, could they pull out that idol and that idol's now theirs?
It's a great question. I think one of the bigger things with this is, and one of my thoughts that I had going into it is, whenever something's thrown into the fire at Tribal Council, it's a very definitive moment, right? You look in the past, again, it's like those fake idols, right? Eliza Stick, the fake idol from Gabon, they get thrown in the fire because like this is signifying that they're out of the game. This is the only time we really have seen something go into the fire to come into the game, right? Where it's like, here, this is in the game when Sabaya's pulling out this like copper tube and it's like canteen, and it seems like this like medical procedure. It's so funny. I was bursting out laughing at that point.
I didn't even take it as a medical procedure. I took it as like, here's the leader, here's the clear like subordinate in Sean, like who has no edit, whose only confessionals have been about challenges. He's just, here's like the NPC side character that like you press square and they come up and pour the water for you.
Yeah.
Like that's like sort of how it came across. And all I could do was laugh about it because I was thinking when she took it out, I'm like, oh, like, did they bring their water? Like, how's she going to pick this up? What if it's just laying on the ground and she still doesn't have a vote? She still doesn't have an idol. Yeah,
it's a great question. I think one of the things that I think this really signifies for me is why Jeff has always harped no advantages at Tribal Council. And he like clarified that after Winners at War and everything, that he doesn't want advantages there. I think it's because like with Sabaya getting up, moving around, everything, it was kind of distracting. Just like even as an audience member, it was distracting whenever Sabaya got up to check that candle.
Well, yeah, like I couldn't tell you 24 hours later, I couldn't tell you what was said at that tribal. It was probably a bunch of nothing. But like I will remember that she constantly was checking and cooking an idol.
For sure. Well, with that, Sabaya decides to risk her vote and not vote. It turns out to not be great, and she gets to join the ranks of the many past Survivor players who have been voted out with an idol in their pocket. The likes of James, Sophie, Ozzy, Kelly Wentworth, John Misch. So many people have been voted out with idols. And this one is more interesting because she had to give up her vote at the same time. But is she just a member of a list now of people voted out with idols?
Not only that, I think it must be the first person who's attended 3 tribal councils and never cast a vote. Because no, I'm not counting Hannah quitting as her voting. A vocal vote is not a vote. So she has never put pen to parchment and went to 3 tribal councils. And with this, all 3 people who had been voted out of this game never cast a vote.
Yeah.
That's a first.
Is it Brandon? Well, because Brandon voted right.
Brandon never voted.
Vote, so it doesn't count. He didn't write it on paper.
Yep.
And he didn't have a vote last time. Yeah, you're right. That's interesting. What an interesting.
Yeah, so Phil, take that knowledge. You're not the only specialist.
Well, with that, we've come to the end of the episode. Alex, thank you again for coming in and guesting while McKenna's gone. Where can people find you?
Oh, yeah, you can find me on my social media at Trias95. I do need to be more active on it with all these reality TV shows that I'm covering between Survivor, The Challenge, and all of its formats, and starting tomorrow, House of Villains with Johnny Fairplay and many guests. You can find me podcasting on Reality After Show.
Awesome. You can always find me here. I'll be joined back with McKenna next week. Check out Phil and Alexa's after show, especially this week. That's a pretty emotional one. Make sure you give it a watch. On Monday this week, Phil and Alexa will be doing their predictions and power rankings with James from The Amazing Race and The Challenge USA. Fantastic person. Great insight into Survivor. Definitely worth listening to. Alex and I are going to be talking Philippines episode 3 over on the Patreon. So you should become one. Become a $20 patron. That way you can listen to mine and McKenna's, this week Alex's Survivor Rewind. You can listen to Phil's after show every week. And you can, it's still early enough in the season. You can still participate in the power rankings. There are some people who probably have less points than you who have already been playing the power rankings. And not to mention, we get 10 new $20 patrons in the month of October. I will sit down and I will watch Jack and Jill on the patron Discord for every patron of every level to watch me suffer through. But we need those new $20 patrons to do that. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click that bell so you receive notifications when we're always on. Follow us on social media. Check out the TikTok. And if you need a Disney vacation, Phil's got that link down there, too, for you to check that out, too. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next week.